So I do think the World Health Organization assembling an emergency meeting, hearing the UK taking these precautionary measures are the right things to do. It also reminds me, Andrew, about our lack of we're doing genetic surveillance in the United States. It's predominantly Delta, but it reminds me that we also cannot let our guard down here to make sure that we understand if there's a spike in the protein in the variant that we're seeing here, and that we have some of those things protected against. So, but all in all, I'm going to remain to reserve caution, reserve concern, and be cautious until we hear about whether or not there's an association with an immune escape phenomenon. Does our current vaccine regimen protect us against this new strain? And I'm hopeful it will.
Well, Doctor, the news that we heard this morning was that the one confirmed case in Israel and the two suspected cases in Israel included people who were fully vaccinated, and not by the definition of the United States, but by the definition of Israel, which is boosted.
Right. Yeah, and we know that they use mRNA vaccines. So obviously that's concerning, but it is one case. I'm not trying to diminish it, but I do think that until we've had that case, we've had several cases in South Africa that are quite concerning of vaccinated individuals. And we're watching because that the UK has their kind of heightened awareness because of their own patterns of migration from African countries. And we also know, I just want to point context, we had the South African variant before we had the Greek naming system. We had a number of these variants present that we also had just seen these spikes, not in vaccinated individuals entirely, but had also seen these spikes in cases. So we can't wait until all the data is in to take precautions, which is why I'm saying that I think at least in the United States, I wouldn't start, putting in broad policies and lockdowns and getting out ahead of ourselves. But I would just say, number one, it raises the urgency of getting everyone vaccinated. You have to imagine, this feels like the virus has a lottery ticket, and it feels like occasionally it's going to win. With Delta, it felt like it won. And we just have to see before we start thinking. But it also it just reminded me, I texted a couple of manufacturing friends, starting to think about tailoring our vaccines for these variants. Does not feel like a bad idea right now.
Doctor, from a policy perspective, though, at what point, and is there a point at which you think the U.S. should say no flights in, no flights out, at what point do those type of things start to happen or at least start to get on the radar?
I think they're already on the radar. There's always, every time we talked about other threats, and including recent coronavirus threats, we always talk about travel restrictions. However, I will say the administration's kind of January deadlines for incoming passengers from other countries, ex-US, to be fully vaccinated according to WHO vaccines, I think is actually the best step. So I don't expect any travel lockdowns in advance of that, unless we start to see UK data confirmatory. Remember, our patterns have a lot more to do with kind of the global, what we saw in early 2020 came from Europe primarily. So we're hoping that they don't have a surge of what I think will eventually be called the new variant, NU. But WHO meeting, EU taking action, and then thinking about the US, I don't anticipate policy on top of that incoming vaccination unless we see threats that this is an immune escape variant, which of course is probably everyone's, keeping me up at night and keeping others up at night, but too soon to get that reaction. Better activity now, Andrew, to have everyone get boosted, be up to date on immunizations, and to think about broader policies such as even domestic vaccine requirements, kind of advancing some of what's being controversially discussed at OSHA and other places federally.